In this lecture, we're going to explore various issues in the original studies that should be considered when evaluating the quality of those original studies to be included in the systematic review. And once those studies have reached a level where the authors have determined that these studies could be included, the assessment of the methods used in those original investigations must be undertaken. And this is where the methods should address the validity of the methods used in those studies as well as the reliability. And so in many studies, these two issues are addressed in studies, but that is something that is not in all studies. So the authors of the systematic review should definitely be looking for those items in the methods. The experimental procedures carried out by those studies, were those procedures well established? And in some cases, is there precedence for those procedures? And if there are, those should be referenced. Are the group assignments, if the research participants are divided between different groups and assigned to different groups, is that very clearly articulated in those original studies? Does the sample size represent the population in question? And so the original studies should detail the criteria used to enroll those participants in the study, and are the statistical analyses well described and accepted methods? And when going through the study methods of the original studies, an overarching question that the researchers of the systematic review can ask is, are these methods in the original study, can those be replicated? And is there sufficient detail for those original studies to be replicated? In terms of the validity of the methods used in those studies, validity relates to the truthfulness of the outcome measures. Do the actual results reflect what was intended to be measured? That's going to be a reflection of the measurement tools and modalities used in those original studies, and is also going to be a reflection of the design of the experiment. In terms of reliability, reliability refers to the measurement tools obtaining consistent results time to time. The basic question we ask with reliability is, can we count on those methods to produce reproducible outcomes? And that's where the term consistency comes into play when we talk about reliability, and it points to the methods used in those studies. The intention to treat analysis is an observation of the research participants enrolled in the study and the research participants that completed the study. And this essentially assesses the dropout rates. Are there missing data in those original studies? And that will be determined by this intention to treat analysis in terms of the percent of the original participants that do not complete the study. And are those rates reported? Many studies actually do not report these rates. But if those rates are reported, are those dropout rates consistent between experimental groups? Are those dropout rates consistent between studies? And can the authors of those original studies explain the reasons why those research participants that were enrolled did not complete the study? In terms of critically evaluating and appraising the RCTs, and those are the randomized controlled trials, there's a scale referred to as the JDAD scale, and this establishes 3 criteria in order to assess the quality of the randomized controlled trials. The first addresses what's called concealment of allocation. And in the randomized controlled trials, research participants, human volunteers, will be assigned to different groups. What were those group assignments known at the time of participant or subject recruitment? The second important criteria to establish the quality of the RCT was blinding or masking. These terms are used interchangeably, and this refers to the research participants and to some extent the actual investigators not being aware of the group of the of whether a participant was assigned to a particular experimental treatment, and so that's where the placebo condition comes into play. And so in order to minimize the risk of bias, blinding or masking, so the research participants and to a certain extent a certain portion of the research team are not aware of which research participant is receiving which experimental treatment. And are the dropouts, the number of people not completing the study as outlined on the previous slide, assessed and reported. Keep in mind, not all studies necessarily will address the dropout rates. In terms of selection bias, this deals with the participants entered into the study. And so do those research participants represent the targeted population? And so that's an important consideration when assessing the quality of the RCT, as well as evaluating what are called confounders. These refer to factors other than the intervention. And so if a randomized clinical trial is evaluating the effectiveness of a new drug, we want to make sure, or the researchers want to make sure, that the final outcome of the experiment can be attributed to the medicinal ingredient in that new drug. But were there other elements that could have affected the outcome of the study? Those confounders will be controlled through the design of the experiment, and those are things that are not accounted for in the research design. As an example, if a research study, an original research study, is examining a dietary intervention for weight loss and are entering research participants. Now, inadvertently, the research participants that were assigned to the group that received the dietary intervention may independently decide to increase their level of physical activity during the day and inadvertently not mention that to the researchers. As a result, the extra degree of physical activity, which is not accounted for, will actually help contribute to the weight loss. And that problem may result in overstating the effects of the dietary intervention. And so the research design and the implementation of the study by the investigators will attempt to think about what sorts of confounders can exist and how to control for those confounders. On this graph here, this is a graph that oftentimes in systematic reviews can be used to address the quality of different studies. And so what we see here on the x-axis, we see a range of different factors that can be used to address the quality of an original investigation. And so we look at randomization process, any deviations from the intended interventions. Are the data, or are some of the data missing from the participants? And what was the outcome measurement? So we see a range of different elements that can be used to evaluate the quality, and the color coding here would indicate whether that particular study carries low risk, some concerns, or high risk of bias. And so in this one, in an original research study, we see in this category, missing outcome data, we see a very high degree of green, so very low risk. A very, very small amount of data may be missing that would make the high risk level very, very small. Alternatively, in terms of overall bias, we see that there is almost equally, maybe a little bit more, concerns about the overall bias than there is with low risk with that one particular study. So this is a chart that isn't always used with systematic reviews, but oftentimes can be used to report the degree of risk of these different factors when evaluating original research studies, suggesting that no one original study will be entirely risk-free. There's always some risk in those studies. So this ends this portion of our lecture in assessing the quality of studies.